Good morning, everyone. This is Mike O'Malley here with a severe weather outlook and discussion recorded on May 7th, 2023, recorded on 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. We have a lot of things to go over today, including a potential significant severe weather threat shaping up across portions of Iowa into Missouri. So let's go ahead and jump straight into everything. Taking a look here, if we actually look at the atmosphere and we're looking at the mid-level water vapor, we actually notice what appears to be this little trough right in here. Looking at the 500 millibar heights overlaid with the mid-level water vapor, we notice that there's this little indent within the overall height contours here. So this indicates that there is this little subtle trough that is moving out of and into the Four Corners region, and that will be sweeping across the plains later today. And so we actually can kind of see here that over the next couple of hours, this is now emerging into the Four Corners area, and the main trough will be ejecting off towards the north and east. This is going to provide the impetus for lift out across the majority of this area throughout the remainder of today. Combine that, we also have a subtropical jet further towards the south, which is aiding in severe weather potential out across the southern plains, especially into southern Texas today. So looking at the risk areas for today, there's a broad enhanced risk for severe storms. This generally along the Interstate 35 corridor, generally from Des Moines, Iowa to just north of Kansas City, Missouri. And this runs to roughly the far western tip of Illinois and back through portions of eastern Nebraska and far northeastern Kansas. Slight risk surrounding that all the way down to portions of Tennessee and into central Illinois and back through Nebraska and far eastern Colorado. And then another slight risk for severe storms, this generally from about Ardmore, Oklahoma southward to just about near Midland, Texas. Broad marginal risk surrounding that. No tornado potential in the south today. Quickly, damaging wind and large hail seem to be the primary threats with this convective mode for severe storms. We'll talk about that more in depth here in a minute. The highest tornado probabilities is going to be centered from roughly around Des Moines, Iowa through Omaha, Nebraska, and back to just near the Mount Pleasant area and far to the west here of Peoria, Illinois. Broad 2% risk surrounding that. Generally speaking, again, 30% chance of significant hail or 30% chance of hail. So 1 inch in diameter hail or greater, that means you have a 30% chance of seeing that within 25 miles of a given point in this 30% area. So this stretching from about Cedar Rapids through Omaha, Nebraska. Again, generally speaking, this is going to be for initial supercells that develop. However, later in the day, damaging wind seems to be the primary concern, stretching from Peoria and really through about the far northern tip here of Tennessee, back and through the boot heel kind of Missouri, and then all the way out here again into the Des Moines and Omaha area. And again, that risk does stretch all the way actually out from portions just near Denver, Colorado, all the way to near Charlotte, to really near Charlotte, North Carolina. So pretty big, broad risk for severe storms today. But generally speaking, our greatest threat is going to be within this enhanced risk, level 3 out of 5 for today. Real quickly, there is also a level 2 out of 5 slight risk for severe storms for tomorrow with a very broad level 1 out of 5 marginal risk, almost forming a supercell structure here. But this slight risk does stretch from about Springfield, Missouri through St. Louis and back through near Evansville, Indiana. And again, this generally speaking is going to be damaging wind and large hail, but there is a threat for tornadoes stretching from southern Indiana all the way through portions of Knoxville, Tennessee, and back through near Kansas City, Missouri. But again, damaging winds and large hail are the primary threats for tomorrow's threat. So over the last 6 hours, we've noticed that we've seen a pretty consistent moisture surge into the north here. And basically, we're now starting to get this higher dew point moisture to surge into portions of southern Iowa. Now, the warm sector here to the north is going to be relatively confined. We notice that there is a broad area of low pressure here on the northern side, this well to the southwest of Omaha, Nebraska. This will be moving off towards the north and east throughout the day. However, again, this will draw that moisture northward, but the extent of this moisture plume isn't going to get much further north than what it currently is. And we kind of noticed that we have 70s dew points out in St. Louis, 61 out here in Kansas City. And again, these temperatures are relatively in the same category. St. Louis is at 79, Kansas City is at 77 right now, but fairly strong wind out of the southwest, 14 gusting to 24. St. Louis is 14 also out of the southwest. So pretty decent winds right now, generally out of the southwest, and this will surge that moisture northward across this broad warm sector today, allowing for severe storms to initiate. Looking at the past 6 hours of 500 millibar winds, we noticed that across the risk area for today, there is actually some pretty strong winds right now on the order of anywhere between 50 and about 70 knots, about 50 to 65 knots here of flow, generally across the risk area for today. And we kind of noticed that that is going to remain over the area. It's not rapidly ejecting off towards the east. There's also this trough back here. We can kind of see it, just this little 500 millibar trough. And this will actually help to also induce a little bit of enhanced flow out across the risk area for today. This generally is actually what is going to be responsible for that upper level wind. It's not impressive and certainly would not constitute for a major severe weather outbreak by any stretch of the imagination. However, I think today, and we'll talk about this here in a second, the convective mode is going to be more linear. And you don't necessarily need a lot of 500 millibar wind aloft for significant straight line winds. However, this would be good for, tornadoes. And I do think there is a tornado potential. We'll get to this here in a second in more detail. But just know that there is support aloft. You've got those winds just above, about 500 millibars, between 50 to 65 knots, which is more than supportive for severe weather. So currently looking at the overall conditions right now, we're looking at the infrared satellite overlaid with radar. We noticed a couple of things at this current hour. First of all, a big band of showers and storms stretching from Evansville, Indiana, all the way out to near the Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio borders. And we also noticed that there is a cluster of storms beginning to fire out here across the risk area for today. This is actually not the main mode for severe weather today. This is not your main threat, really. So initially with these storms, these will probably be somewhat elevated given the fact that we don't have a lot of moisture stretching up here so far. Some of these may become surface-based and produce damaging winds, large hail. Our main threat is actually going to be developing out here today and moving across this risk area later in throughout the day. This again is more so suggesting of a linear mode. However, some discrete storms may fire later in the day out across this area. And so any of these storms right now are not going to pack a huge severe weather threat, but some of them could be capable of damaging winds and or large hail. So this is the latest HRRR forecast. It is nicely depicting the environment currently with a couple of these thunderstorms out here across portions of Nebraska and a few developing cells out here into portions of Iowa at this moment. Maybe a little bit underdone with any of the convection that's out here currently. But the bottom line is we actually kind of move forward with this overall forecast, and we notice that there's not really a whole lot of things going on at this particular moment in time. We run this out to just about 3 p.m. and there's not really much going on. These storms will eventually begin to develop, and then by the time we get out here through later into the evening hours, we start to notice that there is more convection that does develop out here. Mostly, this is all a supercell threat that ends up developing in Iowa initially. More storms out here across portions of Illinois, but our main threat for severe storms across the enhanced risk mode will develop out here across Nebraska and spread eastward with time. And then we also have this risk for severe storms out across the southern mode for today. Generally speaking, again, this is also following more of a linear line. A few supercells possible in southern Texas, along with that lower lifting mechanism and lower forcing for ascent here. But generally speaking, these again will be large hail threats, probably more so elevated with the very hot temperatures out here. So not really expecting a tornado threat to occur with any of these storms, but definitely these supercells that kick in later this evening definitely could pose a severe weather threat out across portions of Iowa. We'll start here at the 5 o'clock hour looking at mixed layer Cape off of the HRRR forecast, and we notice that there is pretty significant amounts of instability, especially across portions of southern Iowa and all the way down this front here into portions of Texas, and then all the way down here into South Texas as well, where these thunderstorms will be building. So this is our area of low pressure. You can kind of see that it's kind of this little cutout right in here. That's our area for low pressure. And we notice that these storms, there will be storms ongoing out across some of this area. You can kind of see the cold pools associated with them, cutting out instability in portions of Kentucky right here. But generally speaking, large instability values, and that actually does surge a little bit northward throughout the evening as this low pressure system barely moves. This is not going to be a fast ejecting system, but it will be moving off towards the northeast, generally speaking. So our warm front is roughly in this area, and we notice from about Omaha, stretching through about Indianapolis, there's this large instability plume, and that exists throughout the entire evening before we start to get more thunderstorms to develop. And roughly by about midnight, we end up having that instability axis being pinched off. And this is generally as a response as to these thunderstorms developing. You've got those outflows developing, and now we're also losing that daytime heating. But large amounts of mixed layer CAPE even through the evening hours, this suggests that there's going to be plenty of fuel for these storms to go on to develop and become strong to severe. Also looking here at the NAM 3 kilometer and the 0 to 3 kilometer SRH, storm relative helicity, we notice that this is starting off at the 0Z hour or 8 p.m. Eastern. We notice that again, we have a pretty nice area of SRH, but generally this is all going to be north of the warm front, north of the instability axis. You can kind of see where that instability axis is from about Omaha southward. So you're not really going to have too much of a tornado threat out across the northern areas for today. That SRH will be high up here, so maybe a few elevated supercells with any storms that can actually get going out here, but mostly that's probably going to be mostly an elevated threat, and that will continue to then weaken as we progress throughout the remainder of the evening. This goes to about, this is 4Z, so this is actually, we're looking here at midnight. And we notice that again, large SRH values out across the eastern area, but by this time, most of these storms would actually be transitioning to a linear mode. So there might be some embedded supercells or embedded QLCS tornadoes, but overall, because this is mostly linear, you can't actually use SRH to determine if you're going to get tornadoes or not. But I do think that, QLCS will have the potential to produce a few tornadoes. So back to the HRRR here, and we're going to pick this off here at just around midnight and watch the full evolution. So you've got these initial storms, again, ongoing across portions of Omaha, Nebraska, through portions of central and eastern Iowa. And this will continue to slide off towards the east, developing and consolidating into one continuous line. And you notice that these storms eventually will be forming more of that classic QLCS type structure. And you notice even a secondary little QLCS that's moving into portions of Alabama and Georgia. This will be weakening at this point in time, so severe weather will probably be confined to the northern few counties here of those states. But notice that there's this large band of showers and storms here producing damaging winds with it. This will definitely have the potential to produce some significant winds over 75 miles per hour. But by this time in the morning, this is 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, this band actually will be losing most of its steam. So severe weather will probably be confined to the apex of these bows and maybe along the instability axis down here to the south. But overall, this will be weakening with time. Also, one last thing here, looking at the HRRR and looking at the 850 millibar winds, this measures our low-level jet strength. And we notice that as we progress throughout the remainder of today, the low-level jet is actually far removed down here to the south and is going to be more in line with the low-level response out here across portions of Kansas. So in fact, our low-level jet out here is only about 35 or 36 miles per hour, a little bit stronger down to the south, maybe 40 to 50 miles per hour there. But generally speaking, that low-level jet is going to be confined to the south. And we notice that low-level jet does increase this evening to over 70 miles per hour in a confined spot here, but generally widespread about 30 to 40, maybe even 50 knots here of flow. But this is all going to be confined, so our supercells out across the northern risk area today, in that enhanced risk zone, won't really be able to take full advantage of the environment with relatively weak low-level flow, but pretty decent mid-level and upper-level flow, may be able to compensate for this, but that's why there's not a super high tornado threat. And I think more of a damaging wind and large hail potential more than anything else today. But a few isolated tornadoes could be possible, maybe even a strong tornado or two, because supercells can create their own shear. And certainly if this is able to ride that warm front down here to the south, any supercells that are able to take advantage of the warm front in this area definitely could produce a tornado. Looking at the overall severe weather parameters for today, central Iowa into central Missouri, there's going to be a lot of lift in the atmosphere. I don't think that's a question really. There's going to be a lot of lift. However, that does mean that there's going to be a lot of storms that end up firing, especially later in the evening. That reduces the overall severe, or the overall tornado potential at least. Moisture, moderate, not going to be a lot of moisture associated with this, especially with northern extent. However, with southern extent, those dew points are already in the 60s and 70s. So a lot of moisture south, not a lot towards the north. Instability, especially along and south of that warm front, going to be quite high, and shear also on the moderate side, but especially low to the north of that warm front, limiting the overall tornado threat. So as far as the overall severe weather threat goes for today, especially from central Iowa into Missouri, tornadoes, there is a moderate threat for tornadoes. I think especially along that warm front and just to the south of that, I think that's where you're going to see the tornado threat locally maximized, especially with supercells that form early and then with the QLCS tornado threat later in the evening. But by far the greatest threats for today, damaging winds, large hail, pretty high threat there. I think there's a high enough confidence to justify that enhanced risk, and some flooding potential, especially with training storms from back-to-back rounds. And I think across the southern risk mode anyway, these damaging winds and large hail threat, same exact threat, I think just on a moderate scale, because again, the confidence in the overall spatial size of the severe threat I think is a little bit limited. But overall, I think the greatest concern today for both risk areas, damaging winds, large hail, and a conditional tornado threat, potentially a conditional strong tornado threat at across the northern risk mode today. But generally speaking, the tornadoes should be tempered by the overall unfavorability of the low-level flow combined with the moisture, especially with northern extent, being quite limited. So we'll be watching for that, but elsewise, damaging winds, large hail, the primary threats here. So with that being said, I do hope you have a great rest of your afternoon and evening. God bless to everyone out there. Stay safe in this crazy world, and I will talk to you guys again some more over the next several days.